Bioleadership says, or the thing we call leadership, human progress, human innovation. I definitely don't mean leadership as individuals kind of heroically standing in front of people charging around with followers. I mean leadership as like, how do we lead our lives and our work collectively? And so bioleadership says the dominant, the business as usual form of leadership in the world is a root cause of the problems that we're trying to address. Our mode of guiding progress is part of the problem. So how do you, to use language that you'd use probably, I guess, is, how do you hack into that DNA? How do you hack into that code? And effectively bioleadership says, imagine we could rekindle a new form of guiding human progress by working with nature as our partner and as part of nature.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. This is episode 22. Thanks for tuning in. It means a lot. This episode is with Andres Roberts, who is founder of the Bioleadership Project, co-founder of Way of Nature UK, and someone I have a huge amount of respect for what he is doing in the world. And Andres, in his words, would say he supports new forms of human progress by working with the principles of living systems and the wisdom of nature. Gotta love that. This was a conversation we had in May at Andres's place in Bristol. It's taken a few weeks for it to see the light of day because it's all been a bit busy round here. But anyway, I want to get fairly quickly into it. I just want to say this is very much it's a conversation, but actually Andres and I end up jamming quite a bit on some of these ideas, mainly because there's some threads which we're both exploring within our work, and actually the opportunity to do this podcast was also an opportunity to kind of maybe chew on some stuff that felt very much of this moment. And as you get into it, you'll feel that. But if you're, I guess, feeling the kind of heat at the moment around climate emergency, climate breakdown, ecological breakdown, if you're feeling that stuff, then you may enjoy this conversation. This is very much an exploration, I guess, of what it feels like to be living, and particularly kind of leading, or leading really in this, and whatever that means, but leading in this time. If you accept this stuff is happening, if you're feeling this kind of pressure for radical change, but you're sort of, also working within the confines of a system which doesn't recognize it, which doesn't incentivize, reward, encourage you to shift, to change your way of leading, to change your way of organising, to reimagine the type of work you're doing. Let's face it, most industries, most categories, most businesses, most organisations are not looking for kind of radical shifts right now. They're just looking to keep profiting and sustaining themselves as things are, really. And yet the planet is actually screaming at us to drop this stuff and to reimagine something which is in tune with life, in sync with life, which is regenerative in nature, which is kind of life-giving versus kind of destructive, extractive, polluting, mind and soul destroying to people. That's a really difficult shift. So I think where we get to in this conversation is really what is it like to be leading and organising in these times, and how do we step across this threshold in light of what we're all experiencing and understanding now. And really, I guess it's exploring courage and new ways of thinking and being and doing in the world. And so, that's the jam. So if you're in that space or feeling that, please have a listen. This could be for you. This is episode 22 of the Spaceship Earth podcast with Andres Roberts. Andres, welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Thanks, Dan. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, in your garden.
Yeah,
I'm making a bit of a habit of sort of actually I was in Chris Salisbury's garden in Devon last month, and now we're in Bristol.
Yeah,
which is nice. There's no chickens in your garden.
No, a little bit of drilling in the background.
Good sort of urban vibes.
Yeah, the flowers are coming. It's nice to have you here.
It's beautiful. It's we've got it's really quite warm. And it's a pleasant afternoon. So thanks for letting me intrude. How are you?
I'm very well. Feeling like spring, and the days are full, and interesting projects happening, and we've been saying this is a moment in time, haven't we? Preparing for this, so
I know it is a bit of a moment. It does feel like a moment right now, isn't it? I mean, I've been ranting quite a lot on the internet in the last few weeks about what this moment is, how it's feeling for me. But maybe we could start with a bit. Let's start with a bit of how you feel before we get into your other stuff.
How do I feel?
Yeah, right now.
Yeah, it feels very full actually at this moment in time. It feels like something has moved, like as a field, something has moved. It feels like, Extinction Rebellion, of course, is such an important reference point right now. But in that week and after that week and since then, and what are we now? Sort of maybe 5 weeks after the big London events.
Yeah, and it's middle of May, isn't it? Something late May.
As soon as you asked me how do I feel, I wanted to say hope. I don't quite think that's the right word, but something has opened new windows, not necessarily huge big windows. It's not massive tipping points, but lots of small movements, lots of small openings, lots of smaller questions, or small questions in more places.
Right.
So what do I feel? It feels like, if we're talking about what you and I talk about, which is sort of what kinds of changes are happening, what's happening, culturally, it feels like when you see many, many fish swimming in the ocean, and all of a sudden a part of that shoal shifts direction, it's lots of little movements like that might be happening. Is that a feeling?
Yeah, that's. I mean, I felt that as you were explaining it. That connects. I want to give the listeners some context on you, before we sort of dig into the now and go deeper. But I've known you for a few years, but can you just give people a sense of your journey to now, just so they've got some context when we go sort of deeper into what's currently really alive for you in your work, but just give a sense of how you've kind of got to where you've got to.
Sure. I graduated and went into a job always feeling like I needed to break the system a little bit. I didn't want to be part of a treadmill. And in my mid-20s, I the first thing that I did to stop the sort of my formal employment was create an agency that was about playfulness. And when I think about that now, it was about how to create experiences that feel more human and more alive.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. Like, that in itself seems quite an exciting or interesting thing, sort of an agency for playfulness. Tell me about that.
It's nice. I mean, it feels like there's a lot of space between that and now. But I have a really strong memory of I graduated and I just went for a job that paid well. Yeah. Knowing that I think I already felt like I'd be some kind of entrepreneurial character, i.e. I'd start my own thing. So I was a bit stubborn, and I was just convinced I'd do my own thing. But the first job I found...
Give me a time zone on this. This has been what?
I graduated in 1999.
Right.
So
90s.
Between 1999 and sort of 2004, I was at Barclays Bank, and I was in marketing and strategy roles. And I remember looking behind me one day at this bank and row of tables and desks, and there was someone who I thought was a really very wonderful person. She looked totally devastated just by being there, just by being in that place. And to me, she looked like she'd fallen asleep. And already then, I'd started to look into how engaged are people at work really, how alive do they feel. And I remember a statistic that stands out for me that I found back then was that only 14% of people feel engaged in their work.
Wow.
And I interestingly, 15 or more, 20 years later, recently another piece of research came out, and that statistic hasn't changed that much, really. So something was happening for me around how have we created social systems, structures, organizations, businesses that are not necessarily conducive to us feeling alive, human, all of ourselves, ... And fast forward 15, 20 years later, I extend that to and part of nature. So what started off with an experience of or exploring what is human, what is positive, what is good, what is alivening, became also about wholeness. It became about good for ourselves, but good for the whole. And that became a lot of what I do today, which maybe you'll ask me about.
Yeah. Tell me about the, when you said the kind of the build into the natural world or connection to nature. Where did that start to come through for you on your journey?
About 10 years ago, 3 things happened at the same time, actually. I was creating these experiences, and the experiences were about helping people shift away from the everyday, ordinary. I don't mean that in a negative sense. They were experiences about helping us step into places where we felt wonder and awe and amazement. And it was a lot of fun, but I think I started to sort of stall a little bit and feel a little bit lonely in it. And then the 3 things that happened, when one was a master's program, which we share.
Right, yeah. That's our connection point.
And I thought that was going to be a kind of green MBA that would teach me about different kinds of social system, different kinds of business structure, corporate responsibility type stuff. I didn't really know, but it's interesting. I was kind of exploring. We need something different. And my God, in the first month of that, I started to ask myself the question of who the hell am I? How do I see the world? How do we see the world?
Yeah.
So that was a little shift for me. I also started to work with an agency that specialized in learning in a much more human way. And that gave me a perspective of how the dominant model of how we organize ourselves is actually really constraining and really limited. Even notions such as management structures with job descriptions can be constraining and limiting to our creativity. So that happened, and then another thing that happened was through the masters and through someone who I met on the program. I had the invitation to go and do my first 24-hour solo in the wilderness, where I sat on the edge of a mountain for 24 hours, looking out at an incredible view with nothing other than my own thoughts and feelings and senses, and it was just the best time. It was just amazing. I'd never been able to listen to myself that way. It wasn't just that I could hear my own thoughts, but I noticed where they came from, and I got such a sense of joy and gratitude and privilege in being in that place, and such a sense of just wonder at this incredible place that I was in, that everything shifted from that moment, really.
How did you, was that, tell us about that experience, that wilderness experience. Was that US thing? Or
no, it wasn't. It was in Spain.
Right.
It was in Spain.
And did you, going through the masters, I think we'll be all right.
Yeah.
I'll edit that because I think these mics will hold it.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm interested in that. So that experience, that 24-hour solo, going back to that kind of master's program, because that's something I'd love to explore a bit more anyway. Was that's the sort of, hearing your response to that experience, that learning experience, that 2 years, right? And I've heard a lot of people, that I know and people we all know that have been through that process. There's a lot of unraveling that occurred on that. Did you find, so this invitation to step more into the natural world, or to open yourself up more to it through an experience like that. Did that feel very intuitive then, coming through that program, as where to sort of, you know, if that person, I would say, I guess if that person hadn't popped up and talked to you about this thing, do you think you were sort of travelling that way?
It's interesting because I think
the reason I ask, because I feel because it's something about this learning piece. Because I've also got a question about these, particularly when we think about the moments we're living in right now, about when we unravel ourselves, when we expose ourselves completely to, you know, to not knowing, and we let go of all these dominant ways that we've been trained or groomed almost to be. It's a place of real. I mean, I found it at times to be extremely lonely and vulnerable, and sometimes the building back up piece, how do you sort of integrate yourself back into, is often sort of a little bit missing maybe. So I was just curious of how fast this sort of happened for you through the program, and because I get a sense quite a few people maybe came out of that program slightly lost.
Do you know, it's interesting because I get it. You remind me of the Leonard Cohen quote about the crack being where the light gets in.
Right.
And we haven't said it, but some of what I do effectively is like a contemporary form of rite of passage for grown-ups as well as young uns. And, you know, and a traditional rite of passage, there is a stepping across a threshold away from what you perceive to be normal, and to go into an experience where you get a shift of perspective, and sometimes that feels challenging, and then you bring that back to community, to your life, bearing gifts, you know, for yourself, but also for that community. So there's that little edge of discomfort, or there's that little edge of stepping into the unknown and new, and unraveling potentially, or disassembling. Well, it's a bit of a mechanical term, but unraveling's better.
Yeah.
At the same time as me starting that masters, I'd just gone through a breakup actually, and I remember introducing myself to the first group in that masters, and everybody was saying really lovely things about, like, oh, you know, I'm married to such and such, and I've got 2 kids, and this is the job that I do, or oh, you know, here I am, and you know, and everybody felt very complete. and I literally just moved out of the home that I shared with someone, and I had no idea where I was going to be in the next 6 months or year of my life. It was completely on the unknown, and for that reason, that process for me was incredibly supportive. I was already sort of on the edge of. I was already stepping into something that had kind of broken effectively.
Yeah.
And I completely soaked up and absorbed and went into the ideas, the tools, the models that were about asking, how do we see life and how do we see ourselves, and let's be dead honest about the paradigm that we're in, and let's be dead honest about what humanity is doing at the moment. So in a way, I was already in that empty, shaken place, that settled,
that not knowing space,
and things could settle in a different way.
Because that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, let's carry on with the next, because it's making me think again. I mean, we talked about this earlier on today, but about that. I think some of us that went on that journey of feeling quite isolated. When you're shifting your worldview so dramatically, because I remember my journey was just, you know, I sort of think deep down intuitively I'd always sense that something was, at least from my view, was radically wrong about, you know, what was perceived as normal progress. You know, just again, not in a logic say, but just I've been carrying a lot of uncomfort for many years about feeling, you know, just removed from what is alive. But I remember like these realizations, and then obviously the learning programs and the content that sort of then gave me the evidence maybe I was looking for, or you know what I mean, or the sort of perspectives which I was like, oh, it was almost like for me a sort of like, it's not just me, you know. But yet at that time, and then we think of where we're at today with everything that's emerging, it still felt quite lonely, because outside of that group, I guess, I still felt coming back into my work, back into my family, back into my community, you know, that idea of bringing something back. I actually felt that was quite difficult still to bring these ideas back into, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
Whereas it feels like, you know, going back to this moment we're in now, that maybe sort of, you know, there's an opening, like you said, like even at the idea of these windows, it feels like things are opening up, because maybe more people are feeling now, or sensing these troubles, I guess.
Yeah. As you say that, one of the things, two thoughts came to mind. One is, in this moment in time, I think people are talking a lot about truth.
Right.
And I can imagine the 10 years ago that I did that program, and you before that, what we started to do was look at facts that felt more true just about the state of the world, you know. And it's a very difficult thing if you can create an objective space to look at what is happening. And I do this. We'll talk a bit about the bioleadership work, I guess, but the first step in the bioleadership work says, let's kind of step back, and almost as if we were aliens or scientists looking at the petri dish, and the petri dish has got the earth, and we're asking a question of how do we navigate, what are we navigating, what are we doing on the planet as a species. Where was I going with that? We're asking about what's truth. So 10 years ago we were looking at, the truth is it's speed, it's production, it's consumption, it's an unhealthy kind of competition, and so on and so on. But so few people really are making space to look at that reality, and certainly 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Whereas now, this moment, it feels like people are a declaration of climate emergency. That's just an honesty. It's a truth. It's a statement of like, this is now, this is the moment, this is the time that we're living in. That feels different. What were you going to say?
Yeah, no, I was just yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's absolutely, and I wonder also whether. So I'm quite interested. I've always been quite interested, and obviously interested in your work as well. And something that is this, you know, these different ways of knowing, this different forms of intelligence that we carry as human beings. That at least my own experience is, you know, of being brought up in a system which hasn't really, which at least in my experience has not given me the confidence to trust those other forms of knowing. So, and when we talk about the work that, you know, you've been developing first through Way of Nature and then into bioleadership, and I think some of the work that was coming through the master's program about that kind of different forms of knowledge and different ways of knowing the world. I've had this chat before so we've been trying to explore why is it that maybe that's stronger for some of us than others, or that sensing. And so, you know, when we think about this moment in time now, my sense is also that more people are feeling a different form of intelligence maybe that's coming through, not just what the head has been telling us. Yeah. You know, that's sort of, you know, the logic driven order, I guess, of things that certainly seems to have dominated so much of, at least, you know, my sort of the 90s and 2000s, and you know, how you learn, how you get ahead, how you do well in the world. And so there's this sort of, for me, there's been this kind of sensing thing that's been sitting underneath this. Right. And again, going back to the natural world, for me anyway, is that there's a tuning in that's sort of almost what's the word? For me, there's a sort of that different way of knowing is it feels, when I'm thinking about a relationship to the non-human world, that different way of knowing is very accepted. It's trusted. It's it's almost honoured in many ways. And so I wonder, as we're in this moment of time, are more of us starting to maybe trust this this new knowledge? I don't know. It's just
I mean, a few things come to mind. One, interestingly, as soon as you started to we started to talk about this moment, I've been using a transactional analysis as a frame for what's happening at the moment.
Tell me about that.
I don't know if you know this, and apologies to people who are very skilled as psychologists and so on in this. But
I've got lots of highly skilled psychologist listeners, so we'll just challenge them now.
So I'll hear the collective scream in a moment. My layman's definition of it is that when we meet each other in life, we can meet each other at 3 levels: as adults, as children, or as parents. We go to those 3 different places. So you or I, even in this conversation, I might approach you and I'm going to talk to you as an adult level, or parent, or child. If I come at you, maybe one version of child might be, Dan, you did this to me, and I go to a bit of a victim position, or I sort of become a bit subservient in some kind of way. Or if I go to parent, I start to preach and shout at you and put you down, and so on and so on. And of course, we're only humans, so when we meet one another in life, if you do something that triggers me, you might do something that sends me to a child position, or you might do something that takes me to a parent position, and you might do something parent, and that will trigger me to go parent, or you might do something child to prompt me to go child. So that's how we meet each other. Right. And I've been thinking for a long time, anything that is nature-based, spiritual, about caring, soft-skilled, and so on, gets put into the child position by society.
That's interesting.
Or I think potentially a lot of activist type roles have something to explore, have potentially placed themselves in that child place because the world is doing something to them. It's very, very subtle, but we feel it. Like so either people like us for a long time over the last, say, 100 years have placed in they're the sweet people in the corner looking after pandas, or we're the little people fighting the big man. And I wonder if something that's happened, which for me feels like it's accelerated just over the last 3-4 years or so, is that, and acceleration maybe isn't the right term, but something that is emerged is that we, as folks who want to bring a sense of balance, connection, regenerative development, care into how we do things, are saying we're going to stay at an adult level. And are you willing to work with us at that adult to adult level? This is no longer just a nice thing to do on the edge. It's no longer about trying to protect the panda because it's a nice animal. I'm not saying it ever has been about that. But to the rest of the world, we're saying this is the most legitimate, valuable, important kind of innovation, and who's willing to work with us at it. And for me, that's a big shift.
That's there's something in that for sure. I want to dig into a bit more into the bioleadership idea, but I do want to just get a little bit of the context of Way of Nature, because that was the journey that you were on, and that came from the US, right? Way of Nature. Tell us a little bit about that idea and what it involves, and how you brought it into this country.
Way of Nature was initiated and still is held by someone called John P. Milton, and John is now 80. As a teenager, in fact before that, but as a teenager he'd already started to guide what we'd call a vision quest in the US, and a vision quest, respectfully across different cultures, is a process of preparing oneself to go out into the wilderness and to be with nature in a very still way, in a very stripped back way, to notice how life goes, both life as nature outside, but life as nature inside. And then you would come back from that process and reintegrate that knowledge and understanding back into life. So John, from a very young age, practiced that and developed a way of doing it. And of course, there are traditions all around the world that have done it in particular ways for a long time, and all of our ancestors in some form or another, I think, have probably done it. And we know that Jesus went into the wild and the Buddha sat under the tree and so on and so on. So it's right across human culture. Specifically, John brought in a lot. For me, some of what I take most from working with John is Eastern philosophy. So from Taoism, the capacity to work with yin and yang, the active energy, but also the receptive energy of yin. In some traditions, you'd call it the divine masculine and divine feminine. That's not gender, but it's that sort of dance of creation and entropy, of diffusion, of fading away for something new to emerge. That dance of being active but also yielding. Way of nature is a way of working with these nature immersions, going deep into nature, combined with ultimately what you'd say is a spiritual or a wisdom practice of a capacity to be a different way and sense a different way, to receive, to connect with how life flows. Yeah.
And I've been watching obviously the development of that, and it's fascinating to see. And one thing I was really loved seeing, it was last year or the year before, was the I can't remember what you called it, but you've basically been trying to train more people up to be able to go out in the world and do this work. It was a program you developed, wasn't it? But I love that. What was it?
We had a guide training program,
right.
And we have these connectors camps, for people who are nature connectors to try and sort of connect us. Lots of little things like that.
Yeah, but it's fascinating because what I hear so much of and have to, in all my work over the last few years, particularly at the grassroots in communities, whether it's trying to figure out how to self-organize and participate in a lot of the breaking down of stuff that's happening, and moving from a model where you had maybe sort of state delivering all these services and things, and relationships or whatever, but again just this real sense of, and probably again a part of this kind of slightly mechanized world that we're still sort of maybe industrialized world, or maybe we're starting to feel we're on the spell is starting to run out. But there's a real always coming up against this need for more individuals that can help, that can become bridges for people, that can help people make these transitions and sort of see the world slightly differently and develop themselves to be more resilient in our societies. And so these programs of helping people become connectors, that feels like such a valuable place right now, and it's quite a hard place for people to function without support and mentoring and development, and so yeah, I was just it's lovely to see it. And I was curious as how are you seeing more? I guess you're seeing more and more interest in this stuff, or not?
It feels like it's so close to where I'm at with my own learning and my own story. It's been fascinating because we were saying it was 10 years ago that I did my first quest for myself, which nature quest is what we call the process of going out alone. And before that, I'd been doing the kind of play-based experiential stuff for 6 years, and before that, I was already learning about sort of systems and strategies. So all of a sudden, you have 20 years of knowledge about how to do it. And I've trained with John and with elders from different traditions, and I've met very, very special people. And all of a sudden, for some reason, I just have a mix of knowing how to do things, and it seems very valuable and helpful for people. People tell me, wow, when they go through one of our quests and I help them, it's a very supportive, transformative process. And then, of course, I want to try and help the moment that we're in, and I want to try and help a web of people be able to bring some of these principles of connection and care and positive change more to the surface. So we've definitely been exploring how to create space and connections to help more people do it, and there's definitely interest in doing that. I can't say I've been doing it very well. It's really hard. It's really hard, and it's a really great example of how, because for me it must not feel like a hierarchical thing. It must not feel like a centralized thing. How would nature grow this? And
it's that. But this whole challenge of what comes after, highly structured, highly organized, centralized, hierarchical systems to things that are organic, self-organizing.
With the bioleadership frames, do you want me to say a bit about what bioleadership? Because
let's do it.
Yeah. Just a sort of headline. Bioleadership says the in its broadest sense possible, leadership, or the thing we call leadership, human progress, human innovation. I definitely don't mean leadership as individuals kind of heroically standing in front of people charging around with followers. I mean leadership as like, how do we lead our lives and our work collectively? And so bioleadership says the dominant, the business as usual form of leadership in the world is a root cause of the problems that we're trying to address. Our mode of guiding progress is part of the problem. So how do you, to use language that you'd use probably, I guess, is, how do you hack into that DNA? How do you hack into that code? And effectively bioleadership says, imagine we could rekindle a new form of guiding human progress by working with nature as our partner and as part of nature. So that's the whole bioleadership work. And the start point for that goes into just to find common ground, just to make a sort of common start point in the sand is what are the principles of business as usual? So in that conversation, you might say some of the principles are maximization. We're perpetually trying to grow things. One of the principles might be centralized or hierarchical control, and there are others. But the reason I'm saying all of that now is because soon after we framed that, we say, so what the hell are we trying to navigate then? What are we trying to move in the world? And the principles are helpful because we then say, well, we might be trying to move from maximization to a different principle that might be, in natural systems, you'd say optimization. The different elements contain themselves in some kind of balance. And we talk about how do we move from hierarchies to a perspective of living systems. But the key bit that you prompted me to bring up is that we're deliberately calling them movements, and we're trying not to make that feel binary, because I don't think it is about saying we have to stop all forms of hierarchy or structure so that everything is totally free flowing. We're trying to find something that does both things at the same time. My sense is that the conventional forms of structure, which feel like very linear structures, need to change, but there is still some form of organizing code that exists, and that's what we're trying to sort of innovate. That's what we're trying to sort of change. I really like that somebody called Gary Hamel wrote a book called The Future of Management probably 10 years ago now, and something that stayed with me with that is that management is just a technology. It's a technology that emerged mainly from military processes and procedures, and we still use that technology today. It's a technology that's over 100 years out of date, but we can change technology. Yeah. So we need a new technology for how we organize ourselves.
It's making me think of a couple of on the management quote tip as something, as another thing. I can't remember who was this. I think it might have been Stephen Covey, but this thing about we cannot think our way out of what we've behaved our way into.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think that feels interesting for me right now, because again, it's this sort of, it's the logic mind.
Yes.
Trying to think of this sort of, how do we? I see, I feel this a lot at the moment with this, and actually this is very much in the moment, the sort of these opposing views of, you've got the sort of neoliberal, let's keep going with the the capitalist model, and those who work hard will survive and flourish and do great, and no sense of any form of ecological logic that's sort of holding this whole system together. And then you've got the sort of like green growth, and let's keep growing, but let's do it in a green way. Sustainable growth, all this kind of stuff. Which there's a lot of holes opening up in that area, and I think talked about this before, but like Jem Bendel's work, the deep adaptation work, someone that's obviously spent his whole career at the kind of sustainable development, let's do business, but let's do it sustainably, it's obviously, and sort of really just rejecting that idea. And so it is an interesting time, isn't it, for this, how to lead when the stories that we've been leading by are sort of coming apart. And how that, because that like you say, it's a different form of leadership or human technology almost that's needed. But we're facing right into this right now, aren't we? It's like really palpable.
Yeah.
Tell me about because obviously you're the bi-leadership now. I mean, is it a couple of years you've been? Is it since you launched this?
It feels like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit about that journey and where it's at right now. What made you flip from what was the kind of catalyst for the bi-leadership?
It's nice actually. I mean, I can to be very practical about it. I was invited to do a program in Brazil, which was the beginning of a social innovation process, where they said, look, would you run a 4-day module, and we're going to call it bioempathy, and they'd already designed part of it, and that was about social leadership. They wanted to bring in biomimicry into it, and they wanted to bring something about systems in it. And I'd started doing that about actually 4 years ago. That was the seed of some of what became bioleadership. But it was the first moment where I thought, wow, I've got a very open, encouraging invitation to do something that says leadership begins with reconnecting with nature. And of course, I was already doing the nature guiding and the solos and so on and so on. So there was a moment where, as you say, probably 2 years ago, we said, right, it's a moment. It's a moment to call it bioleadership. The Amani process and this bioempathy module gave me the confidence to do that. It just felt like it's a moment in time. For the first 18 months, I think a lot of my mind was really in how we legitimize it. And I say this, it's not a word that I often use. I don't really think about how to legitimize things. And I just give them a go. But I was kind of quite busy getting on and doing stuff, doing what we do with Way of Nature, guiding beautiful programs, but trying to bring in some of these learning principles and nature-inspired learning principles into my work that I do with organizations or in change processes and leadership and so on and so on. But very quickly the different bits came together. And I think in the context of this moment, the narrative is it's absolutely fine to say we're going to do a different form of leadership because the dominant story is broken. It just doesn't work. Yeah. So anybody that is questioning, cynical, doubtful, there is no longer ground to stand on. The dominant story of how we lead things is spent. Like we look around here in the garden, we've got indicators of how life sustains itself. Like, how valid is that to say, let's reconnect with life and go from there? Over the course of the last 18 months, all of a sudden, different kinds of practitioner, people like yourself, organizations like Patagonia, who I know are often referred to as a beacon and pioneering stuff, but I'm working with them. There's enough people who've said this is real and it's needed and it's moving to make it feel like, okay, we've got traction with it all and the world needs it. Let's grow it from here. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that's I connect with that observation, because it does feel like this stuff's been it's been bubbling really on the edges for a long time, and I think it is interesting, and to see that. Yeah, I'm fascinated at. I guess this is the back into all these theories of change, and it still feels like this is super early days. But what do you think, in your experience, because you've been working with some really interesting organisations in the last year? What are you learning with these organisations? I mean, it must be a pretty interesting period of time for your own practice, right? And what are you learning from people in the organisations you're working with? What's the vibe, I guess?
Yeah.
Why are they wanting to lean into this work?
I've got a feeling something is... one thing I want to say is it feels like we are building on lots of work that's happened, for many years, really.
Decades, probably, right?
For sure. and I was going to say that, and traditions and ways of being that are centuries and centuries old, and it's nice to, for me, it's nice to sort of honour that and mention that.
I've been having some quite interesting riffs on this in some of these. I had a chat with Chris Salisbury on this one about what I often feel is this obsession with the future, in culture, in business, particularly in business, just obsession with technological breakthroughs and newness. And the answers are always ahead,
right?
And almost a sort of a real unwillingness to look back for wisdom. And again, I'm sensing that's changing in some places, but I still, this obsession, or again, the story, I think, of this, which for me, in my sort of layman's term, is the sort of myth of progress, so that the betterness is always ahead. But what you just said about, honouring that wisdom, and we've been talking about this a lot, all this intelligence that sits in our past and our ancestry, and, deep intelligence and wisdom that feels like, we're crying out for right now, but then bringing that in through our more kind of, our modern world, our more modern systems, but sort of, again, how do we start to integrate or find ways to bring this in? Because, it's just something that's just, it's just interesting to me, this sort of sense of that story that says, what has been and gone is sort of, was nice, but we know so much better now. It's sort of, you know what I mean?
We're looking for the next glossy thing that's coming.
And I think that stuff, how that starts to come into leadership. This kind of ability to sort of honour sort of more ancient wisdom and intelligence, and think, well, how can we call on that now? How would I bring that into?
I mean, if I link that to what you were saying before about what am I learning and what am I seeing, and also linked to what we're talking about this moment, it's funny because I feel a bit like a few things have been stewing and all of a sudden they've come together at the same time. There's the ecological situation, and it feels like maybe in the last 18 months there's a greater mainstream recognition of the climate situation. And of course, carbon in the atmosphere and the climate is only one aspect of what we're doing to Earth systems, but it's one aspect that's in the mainstream or getting there. I feel like over the last 10 years there's been something about purpose and meaning, and I was having a giggle. It's a bit more of some of your industries when advertising started to say that they were going to do more purposeful stuff. But that's been happening. People have been talking about purpose. I think certain people, I mentioned Gary Hamel, there's a guy called Frederic Laloux who's done the work on reinventing organizations. There's been a conversation about how do we transform human systems to be more adaptable and dynamic and innovative, and ultimately potentially more human. I think Laloux's work points towards that. And I think there's been a whole thing about spirituality as well, like, how do we find, ourselves? How do we reconnect with something bigger? How do we connect with nature? And maybe those conversations have been sort of swishing around each other for our lifetimes, and now they seem to be kind of crisscrossing across each other and forming something new. So I'm just playing with that a little bit. But now we have pockets where all of those things are coming together. It's individual, it's connected, it's systemic. It's about how we change organizations and structures. So I don't.
And I think it's funny because I see also that I sort of see again, there was I grew up, my first, years of working, it felt like the culture was very excessive, a very sort of, the 90s, and it really was sort of 80s, late 80s, 90s. I mean, it felt like it was the birth of proper consumerism.
The 90s, 80s, 90s, definitely, yeah.
Because I can remember, I remember my dad coming back from some sort of business trip, and he had this Sony Walkman.
Oh,
and
wow.
And he bought one for me and one for my brother. I think he'd been to Japan, and one was white and one was black. And not only, the idea of a Walkman, which you'd seen the first, which this idea of, but then these really personalised, sort of like things. And I was talking about this to someone recently about, I remember that was such a moment on so many levels, but in many also, for me, it's almost a sort of a slight moment of starting to turn slightly inwards. That whole, this sort of
away from it, or
I've got this thing.
Oh, I see. You can shut yourself off, right?
But I've got this beautiful shiny thing.
Yeah.
Which was amazing, but it's also sort of allowing me to sort of disconnect from.
I get it.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes, of course. Yeah. I really miss the FA Cup, and I used to sit with my grandmother and watch. I don't know, Blackburn. I can't remember typically Man United at the time, wasn't it? But those events where 20 million people would be watching the same thing, or the Generation Game, or Cilla Black on television. Maybe it's something different, but I know what you mean. We've all kind of fragmented and gone into our own selves.
Yeah, but and also but how fast that whole, and then beyond that. So there was this fragmented thing, and then I just remember that the start of this sort of consumerist idea, really kicking in, of just clothes and brands and stuff, and and just being so wowed by it all, and I remember this, and so there's a bit of me and I still sense that that's obviously we're. In many ways, you could say it's. I just can't remember who it was recently, but talking about how the internet has sort of, just fueled sort of hyper-capitalism, hyper-consumption, because we can buy anything, anywhere. People can create products and brands anywhere from anything, and market them anywhere, and you can have stuff delivered at any moment, anywhere. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like the internet, in many ways, was, I don't know. It's sort of. It feels a little bit like it's sort of been colonized by the sort of that machine. But I wonder where again, looking to the edges, it feels again. I guess I'm talking about probably those who've got some privilege to be experimenting more with their lives. But it feels that people are also looking for more grounding, more connection, more meaning, even if it's not with the natural world. They're looking for it with community. They're looking for it with working on themselves more. It does feel like these things are connected, searching for something, and maybe that's part of this process.
I think I would go with that. It's funny because obviously I look at things through the lens of Way of Nature, what we do there, but I had a realization last year that some of what we do with Way of Nature is remind people, or help people remember a sense of belonging. Because there's something so beautiful in a Way of Nature process where you're alone, you're in the wilderness, and people really get that sense of like, I'm okay here. And of course they're miles and miles away from shopping malls, Facebook, telephones, even friends in the pub. They're just themselves, and it's such a lovely space to just feel like I'm actually totally fine and I'm good enough where I'm at the moment. And it shocks me. That moment when, unfortunately, every now and again I still fly with my work.
We're all in this system.
Yeah. But that moment when you walk through a duty free, and that they now kind of wind you, don't they? They extend the walk so that you're sort of, for me, it feels like an attack with smells and sensations and plastic bottles and ridiculous pictures of people in lipstick.
It's completely mad.
So it's very, very, very hard to make space away from that. And we were talking just before we started the podcast with me, for someone who was actually born in the 80s or 90s, well, lots of people will be listening to this who were, but we were talking about, sort of teenagers say, that's the state, that's the everyday, that's it. Yeah. It's like the fishbowl and the water.
Yeah. Well, it's that term. What's the term for it? I can't remember. It's some baseline thing there isn't. But what you're born into is what you understand the world to be, isn't
right,
it?
Yeah.
So you're born into shopping malls and hideous traffic everywhere and air pollution and people like plugged into devices not talking to each other. That's sort of how you imagine the world to be. Which is again sort of why back to this moment, sort of how's this all going to unfold? Because I personally, I'm sort of revealing my sort of own inner madness here, but I've been, as I'm sure you do, but I've been having these stories in, these questions in my head for years. I've been walking through. I picked up my old, actually my master's project recently, and I was reading it, and I remember, it was a piece where I was sitting in an airport. And totally freaking out, looking at everything on my tray, just going like, how was this made? Where's it going? Where's it going to end up? It's this pile of plastic in this tray, and I continue to have these stories. I sort of often, I've got better now at sort of not letting that stuff, that interference. But for many years, I found it very hard because it's like this sort of almost this deeper questioning that starts to happen when you're maybe starting to join the dots on what's really going on here, and then but at the same time you're sort of needing to function and play a role in this thing because you're in it, right? And I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's what I'm really curious about right now, and this work that you're up to and many others I think are we're all moving in this kind of direction, but through maybe different flavors of it. But yeah. But I'm very curious. Like if we bring it back to the UK, we've got this climate emergency. Tomorrow is the global student strikes. Friday. I've had, just from my experience, I've had so many interchanges this week with my son, my daughter, with their schools, with stuff that's coming in about climate strikes, not being allowed to go, can be allowed to go. It's like, it's just, I don't know. It's just the Extinction Rebellion. That it just feels like it's not going away.
No,
this stuff's not going to go away.
No.
So how is this going to start to unfold? Because I still feel I'm getting a lot of people. I'm sensing lots of questions, more and more questioning, more people really feeling that something is. We're coming to a threshold, but still, I imagine a huge amount of rejection or not really being able to not really being able to maybe fully open up to what's coming. Yeah. And when you're going in, if you work and you're going into work every day, or how is this? Where are your hunches of where we're going to see more of this unfold?
Yeah. Maybe not a hunch, but I can definitely say how I'm framing my navigation of this and also the bioleadership work in a way that feels helpful.
Helps good for me.
Yeah. It's only a feeling. I could be totally wrong. But with the bioleadership, what we've said is, imagine that there are 3 threads happening at the same time. Imagine that we could work with these 3 threads. They're all important. The first thread is the clever thinking. It's tools and stories and models that help us think about, okay, where's the inspiration for new ideas and how do we apply it? So you might say, hey, here's a neat interpretation of how nature works, so we can apply that to a human system. We were talking about optimization before. Nature works through optimization, so how do we design a city with optimization? Fine, it's really important. It's still the same level of thinking as how we've been thinking for the last century. Back to the quote that you said about, we can't think our way of what we've been behaving. So the second thread of the bioleadership work says, what is the stuff that we need to cultivate more internally as qualities for living and being that might be more rooted in, it's intangible, but it's stuff related to connection, awareness, presence, resilience, adaptability, care, love. No, we our generations didn't have that in our school syllabus. Nobody taught me how to
lots of fear,
panic, do well, do better, go faster, go
beat
quicker.
Everyone else, get ahead of everyone.
Right. But interestingly, there are also qualities that you can't sort of write about in a textbook. You have to feel them. So alongside the clever ideas,
having a proper nature off.
Yes,
going on right now.
we're having a right sort of mini safari,
bioleadership moment right here in the garden. Brilliant.
A little bit lost in bird life there. So the first thread is smart thinking. It's good ideas that are applicable, and we need a whole new generation of great ideas. Brilliant. And some of those ideas should be rooted in old wisdom. Fine. But another whole part of it is ways of being, and authentically, properly making space for us to be able to work with each other with resilience and adaptability and deep listening and care. And it comes back to that transactional analysis thing, not because it's a nice thing to do, not because we're hippies dancing around fires, which we are, well, you and I are, but because it's absolutely the next sort of like necessity in learning and how we develop ourselves and our human system. So that's the second part. And then the third thread is about collective learning. None of us can do this by ourselves. So what are the different forms of how we learn, not just as individuals, not just as the two of us in this conversation, but as a collective system? And learning includes things like, what language do we use to try to shift culture? What innovation methods might we use to weave something into a dominant paradigm? But also, what are the belief systems that we're carrying that we need to work with in order to shift what we're doing? Like, I believe I need more stuff, or I believe I'm good enough to bring this to the world, So it's a whistle-stop tour of actually what we're doing with bioleadership. We're saying we need a whole new set of narratives, stories, tools. One, we need a different way of working as ourselves internally with a different set of qualities. And we need different ways to connect as a system, as a field, in order to introduce something new to the world. And there are beautiful stories happening in all of those spaces. No one's doing all of them at the same time, but there are definitely beautiful seeds that mean there are many kinds of action that we can keep building on.
One of the things that's quite live for me at the moment is so if I look at, say, the creative industries and communications industries, advertising, marketing, branding, of which I've always had a foot in that space. And while I'm not a practitioner in that main consumption model anymore, I have many peers there, and I still, I'm always probably have been frustrated for many years about the lack of ability to see how that whole system could be used in a way that's more regenerative for people and planet, let's say. But so thinking now, like the bit I think I posted about this last week, but the Extinction Rebellion call out to the ad industry. That's a really interesting dynamic. And what I'm struggling with, although I would love to see that, and the conversation I've started having with a few people in agencies right now, is that the current paradigm says each brand, each agency is highly competitive. It's there to achieve breakthrough creative work that wins awards and does great things and sells loads of stuff and makes brands famous, and businesses rich financially. That's the thing, regardless of how it's whatever. That's really the model. So if we're moving into this paradigm of moving to an optimized way of being, moving to a way of regeneration, there has to be, that idea can't exist. I mean, it can exist in there can have elements of that kind of culture, because you need competition in healthy systems. You don't need to wipe it out, but you need a lot more cooperation and you need a lot better relationships and understanding to keep the system healthy, right? So let's bring it back to a really practical thing. But say I'm a leader in these businesses right now. My whole sort of existence has been built on that. Getting ahead, being better, winning. Yeah. So if I'm to lean into this, to face into what is coming, to this, to ecological collapse, to climate breakdown, my model has to so rapidly shift. But I also have to, if I really am going to courageously step up, I also need to use this ingenuity to help others understand very quickly what is happening, so that we can play a part in the system shift, right? Yeah. Because culture change is often the thing that will lead political change, etc., etc. So bring it right back by leadership of the stuff. So how can we break through? Can we imagine, different organisations sitting together, working together? Because that feels like we need, this can't be again just, lone wolf stuff. There has to be some collaboration going on here. But I'm interested in how that might unfold. Or are you seeing any signals of that in Europe? Because it's still very much an organisation aware of its relationship to the rest of the world, but still having to operate in this kind of, we've got to look after ourselves type mentality. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't know how we get there, but it feels like a really, we've been talking about this, you and I and many people, about how do we open up collaborations, but it still feels like so difficult to unlock that, because we have to really expose ourselves to sort of move into that space, don't we?
Definitely. I'm with you with everything you said, and framing it as a question, and I don't know if we can do much more than hold it as an inquiry. But an inquiry isn't passive for me. It doesn't mean that we just hold it as a question and walk away from it. You and I share some of this language. I think I'm using that term deliberately because I think what might be happening is we're exploring how to create different spaces where organizations come together and ask questions in a different way. And I think I'm saying inquiry because it deliberately it says we're in unstable ground, we're on uncertain ground, and a natural reflex is to want to control something, of course.
Keep yourself afloat, hold on, survive, sort of almost.
Well, and keep meaning, keep meaning of the world. I think it's okay to say it, but I'm doing a bit of work with Patagonia, and I know Patagonia are asked questions in Europe, at least, about how do you measure what you're doing, and they're actually not. They're saying, and a new mission statement is, we're in business to save our home planet.
Yeah, I love that. But at the same time, it's insane. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's bonkers.
Yeah, and of course, so many people, even within the business, beyond the business, is, well, what does that mean? How do you measure it? How do you... And it says something about this moment of time where, like, we just have to have a go.
Yeah, right.
You know, we know the truth. We have to have a go. So rather than have a beautifully crafted strategy that has been created by 5 people in a fancy room that doesn't really reach people at a heart level, you know, let's ask really courageous questions that we can convene around. And I don't know if it's happening in that many places, but it feels like enough people are saying we need to do stuff like that to give it a go. There's a nice project that I worked on where we introduced some of these principles. It was with a university in the Northwest, and I'll say the story very, very briefly, but effectively it was about working on social enterprise. And I said, let's stop trying to plan this and ask people in the region what they think is important. And they came up with a few themes like sustainable food sources, health inequality is a big issue, 0-hour contracting is a big issue. And we just invited different groups who worked around those themes to come together. And I worked with a handful of people who represented that system to get good at asking questions and to guide people in exploring questions together. And it was such a lovely example of not trying to plan the hell out of it, not trying to control it, not trying to predict what the future will be, but navigating together by asking human questions and doing a little bit of letting go of that control. It comes to me right back to what we were saying, that dynamic of moving away from hierarchies and creating living systems. We still need clarity. We still need guiding principles. We still need something that maybe feels like DNA, that says from the inside of a movement, how do we know if we're working well? That's different to having a top-down plan.
Yeah, and that's the piece that feels like maybe this next step, and that's a co-creation process to maybe create these kind of guiding principles in organizations in order then to, you know, unlock the wave of response where there is some guidance, but there's enough guidance that's been co-created by a much bigger kind of system of you know, participants, if you like, beyond just, you know, senior management, shareholders, whatever, that's been sort of co-created by the whole kind of system of an organization.
Yeah.
And then that set of principles, that kind of map, if you like, is then what is used, I guess, to move into this next phase of of what unfolds from this moment that we're in.
Yeah.
Because and it's funny, jumping back to the moment. So even if you look at the Extinction Rebellion's, you know, citizens' assemblies idea, I mean, these are all these are all co-creation type processes, if you like. And increasingly these things feel like critical pieces, whether you're in an organization, a business, an institution, you know, these kind of next steps feel really key, that they are designed in an open way with multiple perspectives. And so that these, you know, and through a process, I guess, which allows much deeper exploration of and questioning, right?
Yeah. I really like it. You're making me think about Joanna Macy and her work, and in her work she says we have these 3 dimensions to the Great Turning, no? And
the work reconnects.
Well, within all of that,
right?
Joanna Macy says there are 3 kinds of actions that we can take, and people might recognize this, but it's nice to say them.
Yeah.
The Great Turning is this next phase that you're talking about. If we crack it, if we get it right, future generations might say that was the phase of humanity which we will call the Great Turning, when we managed to turn the ship around and rebalance and care and get things long lasting and sustainable and protective of life. Anyway, so there are 3 kinds of action. The first kind of action is holding actions to slow down the things that are destructive, erosive, damaging, and so on. We need to act to stop those things. Extinction Rebellion as such a brilliant, handbrake on that. That's the kind of action. We need new alternatives. That's the second kind of action. Things that will bring a new surface to the system, And the third action is a new level of consciousness. And it's such a big word, isn't it? But even if we take it to be having better conversations where we let go a little bit of the ego of our own desires and wants and so on. And it's the space that I think I hear in some of what you're saying. It's a different space to say, okay, let's let go of our own individual stuff, or at least hold it in a different way so that we can bring something new.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm totally fascinated by that element, and I've experienced a lot of it of how when we do quieten our cleverness, as Duke Stump used to say, and we do allow ourselves to really listen to others, and we do allow a lot more voices to be heard. We learn so much about ourselves, but then we create this new knowledge, that's kind of like, that has a kind of, it's got community baked into it because it's been co-created, just through that process of even just listening.
Exactly.
And building that in as a regular practice, making that the new norm, We've been doing, even just bringing it right back to now, me and Seema, my wife, we've been just bringing more. We went on this retreat and we've come back and we've been trying to bring. It was a lot of circle work, in the retreat, and we just said to each other, why don't we try and bring this back into the home? Like, because I've got 2 kids that are teenage now, and one that's, and it's a lot of complexity and chaos going on at home, and we're just like, why don't we just bring that in? Let's try it, And we just started trying it, and it's just been unbelievable. Like, in terms of, and the kids of us were a bit like, oh, here you go, Mum and Dad have been to Amsterdam, what's going on there? But but they broke through pretty fast, and now it's that we do it every week, and you can just feel the release.
Wow.
in our unit. Wow. And actually, they're asking for it after 3 weeks.
So good, Dan. It's
do you know
great.
what I mean? But all I'm saying is, again, it's not, this stuff isn't difficult, is it? It's like it's just started. It's just the being able to take the step to start doing it. Because once you start doing it, you realise it's regenerative. It's helping us move forward. Right. It's helping us let go of the shit that's dragging us down on a daily basis, or filling our minds. Yeah.
It's so interesting because just before you said this shit's not difficult, I was thinking, well, I wonder if that's the most difficult part. We've got the technology. We can lock ourselves in laboratories and create new stuff and machines and solutions. We can work out with engineering. All of these. Humanity has progressed so much in what we can do materially, but creating spaces where we can actually genuinely, deeply listen into each other with a sense of care, with a common intention, with a little intention within that to really support each other, with the capacity to sort of let go. We barely touch the surface of that, I think, in our times.
Yeah, it's reminding me of there's a just keep the quotes flowing. But there's a guy, I forget his name. He's a futurist. I'll have to stick it in the show notes. But it's a thought that I've been using a lot over the last, since I stumbled across it, which was like what was it? The most profound breakthroughs of the 21st century will not be technological. They'll be breakthroughs in what it means to be human. And that's just like, that's what I'm carrying at the moment. That's sort of why I'm trying to bring that into things as much as I can, because I know of course we'll keep innovating and stuff, but we've got so much technology. We have so much. It's like, but if we don't, it's, we've got to, this, what it means to be human. This, it's building our spiritual capacity. We have so much technological capacity. So I'm really interested in.
We won't fix it that way.
Yeah.
We won't fix it by trying to kind of be smart with ideas. I just don't believe that anymore. I mean, I don't think I've ever believed it really. I'm advocating it a little bit, but because there's something really beautiful in it, which is in our own bio-leadership work, there's a practice group, and it's just an inquiry. We're exploring how to bring more of it to the world, how to do a bit more of it. And we got together for a gathering a few weeks back, and we were talking so much, trying to work it out in our heads. And I came away thinking, if only we'd have started from a place of kindly listening to each other. Like, yeah, it sounds cheesy to say it, but just hearing where everybody was at with what they needed and where they were in their lives, and hearing a little bit about, you know, the kind of work that they'd want to be doing more of, it would have been a totally different place to start from. It's so easy to forget that, but that place, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really coming back to, you know, circle technology right now. You know, like just sit in a circle and shut up and just let everyone just get some stuff out and listen to them, and then just, you know, move on from there. And like, you know, that's an ancient technology, right? But it works. I just wonder what even just these kind of things. I said, because I think I do sense again at this moment, you know, the panic that's probably starting to set in again is often, I think, because we're thinking within our different contexts that we're in, how do I reinvent my life? You know, how do I reinvent my business? But even maybe the starting point is, let's just start from this very human point, you know, the starting point of just being, just kind of pausing and bringing some stillness and just stop talking, just shut up for a while. Do you know what I mean?
I love it.
Do you know what I mean?
I love it.
Just can everyone just shut up for a while and stuff? Because we don't. It's always noisy. Have you noticed that, how noisy humanity is? I saw this guy. I can't remember what his name is. He's a Icelandic musician. Is it Olafur Arnold? I think it is.
Oh, the pianist.
Yeah, and he did a gig in Bath last year, and he said at one point he'd been out in Bali, and he'd been writing some music out there. It was out there and he said there was this. I don't know when it was. It was over a New Year or something. But they have this day in Bali, which is a day of silence where everyone has to stop for the day. There's not, you know, you're not allowed to sort of drive any machinery, any power. Nothing, okay, and it's basically to let the non-human world have a break from the human madness.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and he said it was just the most extraordinary experience.
Oh.
Yeah, and it made me think, like, you know, God, you know, can we have a day like that? You know what I mean? Like,
Wonderful.
Wouldn't it be? Just to stop, silence, quiet.
Well, that's how nature works.
Yeah, right. We've come full circle. Andres, I'm conscious of time. It's been a wonderful exploration. We could go on. I know that
we could go on.
But we'll do another one down the line. But just to finish off, so I always ask this question, you know, with the SpaceShip Earth, and you know, this idea that came with it that, you know, there are no passengers on the SpaceShip Earth. We're all crew. And I always ask that in the podcast, just like, what does right now, what does that mean to you, that idea? There are no passengers, we're all crew.
We said it earlier, didn't we? Have a go.
Love it. Thank you, mate. There you go. That is the wisdom we all need. Just have a go. Yeah. Simples. Thank you, mate. It's lovely to talk. I'm going to put all. Is there anything, just quickly? Is there anything coming up that you want to, you know, folks can find out more? I mean, obviously, I put all the web links in the thing, but
well, we you know, with different ways of connecting with the bio-leadership work. From we've started little evenings to 3-day introductory programs. We're definitely calling out for practitioners, because we want to hold this sort of workshops and maybe a kind of gathering towards the end of the year to connect people, just to exchange knowledge and stories around more of this stuff. And always with Way of Nature, we'll guide nature quests to support people in going into the wild, spending time alone and bringing that wisdom back. And increasingly, because of this moment in time, we want to do more and more of that to support the Great Turning. So if anybody wants to find out more about that, then it would be really lovely to get in touch. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Andres.
Thank you.
Take it easy. We'll be in touch again, I'm sure.
Yeah. Big Bristol hug.
Cheers, man. Cheers, man. So that was Andres Roberts. What a wise man Andres is. I hope you enjoyed that. Do check his work out. Links below. And get involved. Lots of different ways where you can connect with his work, courses, as an individual as well as organisation. So check that out. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please do share with anyone who you think might like this one. And yeah, give me some feedback. Dan at thespaceship.earth. Always appreciated. If anything in this conversation has touched you as well, I'm doing a lot of work now around these issues and helping kind of folks lean into them, particularly folks from sort of creative businesses, how to face into what is coming fast, how to step into this challenge, how to think about evolving what you do. This is all really ripe, interesting inquiries for me. So if any of this connects with you and you want to chat further about it, do reach out. Got a newsletter coming as well. You can sign up for that on thespaceship.earth. You'll see the newsletter. Just pop your mail in. It's not going to be, I'm aiming for a monthly one. Just the latest podcasts and then a few bits and pieces from my travels, exploring the challenges, opportunities and beauty of living more in tune with this planet. So yeah, sign up for all of that. Likewise, if you like what you're hearing on this podcast, give us a review, give us a rating. It all helps. It helps others find the podcast. So, reviews are good. There's a few down there on Apple Podcasts, but I'd love a couple more. Please, Governor, could you give us a little cheeky review? Thanks, mate. That'd be really useful. Anyway, if you do, that's great because it just means other people find it, and that's lovely because it means more listeners, which is lovely too. And so finally, I guess I was thinking, I might need some help with this podcast. So I'm going to put it out there. I know sometimes it's a bit slowly these episodes come. That's mainly because I record them and just have no time to put them out. It takes a bit of time. To do all this stuff, in amongst all the other craziness. So if someone's out there and they fancy making me a nice jingle, for example, do I need a jingle? Might be quite nice. What would the Spaceship Earth podcast with Dan Burgess jingle sound like? How cosmic would it be? Would it be pumping techno, or would it be more ethereal and sort of slightly spiritual in nature? I don't know. But anyway, that might be quite nice. And then, if you're in sort of some sort of editing ninja and you're interested in helping me out, I've got loads more coming, but I'm struggling to keep on top of it all. Basically, I'm having a breakdown. Obviously, I have a budget of absolutely nothing. A couple of stickers and lots of love from me. But I can sense there's a sponsor coming down the line. They're starting to sniff the beauty in this conversational thing called the Spaceship Earth, and I think they're being attracted like bees. Like we're starting to flower slowly. We're flowering and budding onto the internet of audio. So if you start, getting involved now, that, obviously when the big sponsorship package drops, it'll all be sweet. Anyway, I'll leave it on that note. But, if you know anyone or know anyone who knows anyone, then, it's Dan at thespaceship.earth. Otherwise, folks, thanks again for listening in. I really do appreciate it. It means a lot when people get in touch and people are listening and sharing and stuff, and that's what it's all about. So remember, folks, there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We are all crew. Until next time, peace and out.